Can China outlast Trump? 80 million Americans hacked by China. And New Zealand falls for one belt, one ring to rule them all. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News headlines. Months of trade negotiations with China have failed. And are you really surprised? Now the Trump administration is preparing 25% tariffs on an additional $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. Obviously, the Chinese Communist Party is not happy about the tariffs. Chinese leader Xi Jinping called them foolish. No, foolish is the Chinese Communist Party censoring the letter N, believing that will somehow stop people from criticizing Xi Jinping. Side note, it didn't work. Anyway, with respect to the tariffs, state-run People's Daily released this snappy graphic on its official WeChat account. It says, negotiate? Sure. Fight? Anytime. Bully us? Wishful thinking. So the Chinese Communist Party is obviously upset, but I doubt surprised. The Trump administration was demanding reforms that the authoritarian regime is simply unwilling to make. That could be why the Chinese regime blew up the trade deal. According to Reuters, in each of the 7 chapters of the draft trade deal, China had deleted its commitments to change laws to resolve core complaints that caused the United States to launch a trade war: theft of U.S. intellectual property and trade secrets, forced technology transfers, competition policy, access to financial services, and currency manipulation. Maybe they expected the U.S. government to back down and sign the trade deal anyway. But that's not what happened. So, what impact will this have on China? Well, the Chinese regime has kept their economy afloat no matter what disaster they've faced so far. Bad debt, corruption, a housing bubble, you name it. They're really good at finding short-term solutions. In this case, there's the hundreds of billions of dollars that Beijing has pumped into the country's economy in recent months, as well as the loans that officials have pressed state-run banks to make to businesses. My guess is that the Chinese regime is trying to hang on till the 2020 elections, in the hopes that Trump will be replaced with someone a lot softer on China. And when it comes to election interference, they've already been racking up experience points. But if the Chinese regime thinks it'll get easier for them as long as a Democrat wins in 2020, they should think again. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeted that Trump should hang tough on China. And most of the current Democrats running for president are now also hanging tough on China. And while former Vice President Joe Biden recently said he didn't see China as a competitor, he was criticized by Bernie Sanders. Yes, Bernie Sanders. I can't wait for those two to debate. 2 Canadian citizens in China have been charged with spying: Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Chinese authorities arrested them both in December. That was after Canada arrested Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou for extradition to the U.S., and the Canadian government refused to simply let her go arbitrarily. But don't worry, the Chinese charges against the 2 Canadians are not arbitrary. They're definitely guilty of being Canadians in the wrong place at the wrong time. Amnesty International has spent years criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. But Chinese-backed companies have spent years buying up real estate in New York, so guess who's winning? Amnesty International just had their lease denied by China. They were trying to move their New York headquarters to a building in Lower Manhattan called Wall Street Plaza. But just as the organization was about to sign a lease last week, the building's owner said that its new parent company, a giant shipping conglomerate owned by the Chinese government, decided to veto the offer. Such a troll move, which is why I'm giving this a rating of 4 Pepe the Poos. Huawei, the Chinese telecom company the U.S. says is a national security threat and probably receives funding from the Chinese military. A lot of countries have banned Huawei from building sensitive tech infrastructure, but not the UK. Why not? Aren't they concerned? Of course not. Huawei has told them they're ready to sign a no spy, no backdoor contract. I mean, when was the last time you heard Verizon give that guarantee? The Huawei chief said, "We are willing to sign no spy agreements with governments, including the UK government, to commit ourselves, to commit our equipment to meeting the no spy, no backdoor standards." Now, believe it or not, there are still some people who are not satisfied with a no spy agreement and still consider Huawei a threat. I mean, there's just no pleasing some people. Speaking of not pleasing people, Google. Last year, The Intercept revealed a secret project Google was working on to create a censored search app for China. Google spent a long time denying its existence. Well, in an interview with the BBC, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt defended the censored app that Google had to eventually admit really existed. It would have many benefits and would help change China to be more open, which is obviously why Google spends so much time lying about its existence and not even telling most of their employees what they were actually working on. Sounds like something to be proud of. Unlike Google, Wikipedia was unwilling to censor their website in China, which is why the Chinese language Wikipedia has been blocked in China since 2015. Well, now it's been totally banned in all languages. Oh no, now Chinese trolls will have to use a VPN to alter Wikipedia's controversial China content for the rest of the world. Now sure, Chinese internet censorship and surveillance seems bad, but on the plus side, they're giving us the latest, greatest boy band experience. China Youth Credit Management is a group working with the Communist Youth League. They've recently designed an app to incentivize positive action by putting its users under constant surveillance. But just in case this amazing sounding app doesn't sell itself, China Youth Credit Management has created a music video to promote it. It features China's popular boy band TF Boys and some other celebrities. I love how clean cut and obedient they all look. I bet they all get good grades, return library books on time, and stay away from subversive content on the internet. But this is great news for TF Boys. Everyone knows you're not a real boy band until you make a propaganda music video. Just like NSYNC's famous Bye 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 music video extolling the virtues of being puppets of American imperialism. And finally, a man in China has been arrested for giving dogs illegal names. Apparently he named his dogs after two common job titles, Chengguang and Xieguan. Chengguangs are officials employed in urban areas to tackle low-level crime, while Xieguan are informal community workers such as traffic assistants. Local law enforcement, and I use that term loosely in regards to China, said the man caused great harm to the nation and the city's urban management, in terms of their feelings. And hurting the feelings of law enforcement is not very nice. So they threw the guy in jail for 10 days. That'll teach him to respect the rule of law. And don't go anywhere, because after the break, 80 million Americans have been hacked. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The United States has just indicted 2 Chinese hackers and charged them with cybercrimes. Very serious cybercrimes. The first alleged cybercriminal, Fujie Wang, aka Dennis Wang. Here's his wanted poster. The second accused hacker, Zhou Zhihong, aka Daniel Jack. That's right, Daniel Jack. Here's his wanted poster. Bringing him in is going to be hard. There are a lot of lookalikes out there. In an announcement last week, the Department of Justice said Dennis Wang and Daniel Jack are members of an extremely sophisticated hacking group operating in China and targeting large businesses in the United States. The DOJ indicted the duo for a range of cybercrimes that include intentional damage to a protected computer and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The biggest of their several cyber intrusions dates back to 2015. The target was a company called Anthem. It's one of the biggest health insurance companies in the US. Now you might think, that's just karmic justice for those big insurance companies ripping off Americans. But the thing is, the hackers weren't after lower insurance premiums. They were after the sensitive personal data of nearly 80 million customers, including maybe yours. The indictment says the hackers broke into Anthem's computer networks using a bag of sophisticated tricks. First, spear phishing, where they targeted Anthem employees with emails containing malicious hyperlinks. Click the link and it automatically downloads malware, where they installed malicious software that runs automatically and installs a backdoor, which is a tool that lets hackers control a computer remotely. It's like when you get an email in weird English promising you an all-expenses paid cruise in Bahama if you could please just click on this link. And then they steal everything. According to the indictment, Wang and Jack collected files and other information from the compromised computers and then stole i.e. exfiltrated this data of interest using encrypted archives and computers under their control. And where did all that stolen data get exfiltrated to? China. And what did all that stolen data contain? Personally identifiable information of some 78.8 million people, including names, addresses, income data, and social security numbers. So don't be surprised if you start getting personalized spam from a guy selling knockoff whiskey. But more seriously, if the hackers decide to sell the data, this could potentially be a huge opportunity for identity theft. According to the Social Security Administration, identity thieves can use your social security number to get credit in your name, and then they use the credit cards and don't pay the bills. Using credit cards and not paying the bills? They're even ripping off a traditional American pastime. So it's not just virtual spam pinging your mailbox. It could mean very real, very physical debt collectors beating down your door. Although an Anthem spokeswoman was quick to tell the Wall Street Journal that there is no evidence that information obtained has resulted in fraud. Does that mean the hackers stole data on nearly 80 million people for no reason? Or just not for fraud? Because there's also blackmail. Anyway, just how bad is the data breach involving nearly 80 million people? Well, according to Assistant Attorney General Brian Benczkowski, the brazen China-based computer hacking group committed one of the worst data breaches in history. One of the worst data breaches in history? Oh man, you hackers are in big trouble. Just kidding, they're in China. But don't worry, the Chinese authorities will soon find their secret hideout, so they can send them bottles of champagne and a little note card thanking them for their contribution to win-win mutual cooperation with the United States. Now, if this story sounds familiar, it is. I'd like to call it Hacking 2 Electric Boogaloo. Back in December, U.S. prosecutors announced cybercrimes charges against 2 other Chinese hackers.
Today, the Department of Justice is announcing a criminal indictment of 2 hackers associated with the Chinese government. The charges include conspiracy to commit computer intrusions against dozens of companies in the United States and around the world.
And FBI Director Christopher Wray said at the time that cyber threats from hackers with links to the Chinese regime are as bad as it gets.
As evidenced by this investigation, the threats we face have never been more severe or more pervasive or more potentially damaging to our national security. And no country poses a broader, more severe, long-term threat to our nation's economy and cyber infrastructure than China.
What's that, Shelley? The U.S. government also indicted Chinese hackers back in November 2018. Okay, so this is more like Hackers Part 3, Rise of the Machines. What? They also indicted Chinese hackers and spies in October 2018. Okay, so this is more like Kingdom of the Crystal Hack, the 4th sequel that no one asked for. What's that, Shelley? The U.S. government also indicted Chinese hackers in 2017 and all the way back in 2014 when they indicted hackers who were actually members of the People's Liberation Army? Yeah, forget it, I'm done with this joke. Only the Star Wars movies have enough sequels to deal with this. And believe me, I'm ready for that series to be done. I guess this is why the U.S. government has said there's a new hacking spree coming from China. But while these indictments might show that the U.S. government means business, they also show that they're not actually good at stopping the hacking. So my advice is, if you get an email in broken English with an attachment claiming to offer you an all-expenses paid cruise, don't click on it. And coming up next, the New Zealand government thinks their country will be better off if it partners more with the Chinese Communist Party. Let's see how that goes. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. China's One Belt, One Road initiative. It's Beijing's trillion-dollar infrastructure investment scheme. And it's kind of like the One Ring. Sure, it looks shiny and nice, but if you put it on, you might find yourself enslaved to Sauron. Or in this case, the Chinese Communist Party, which I'm pretty sure is worse since it's actually real. A lot of developing countries that have joined the Belt and Road end up unable to pay back Chinese loans. They get trapped in debt and are forced to give the Chinese Communist Party their souls, as well as strategic assets like natural resources and shipping ports. Most countries that have joined the Belt and Road are poor developing countries. But the Chinese Communist Party is now making a push to get Western developed countries to join in as well. This year, Beijing nabbed its first G7 country, Italy. And China's doing some major PR by saying the Belt and Road will from now on be green and sustainable. Somehow, using these buzzwords must be really convincing, because now New Zealand has just joined the Belt and Road. I get it, New Zealand is green, and it is sustainable, like its amazing grass-fed dairy farms. And of course, New Zealand is the place where Lord of the Rings was filmed, so it seems so natural. You know, I once visited the set of Hobbiton dressed as Hugo Weaving dressed as Elrond. You've probably never seen that episode, but you will now? Anyway, New Zealand is a beautiful country, which is why they filmed Lord of the Rings there. But now, like Middle-earth, New Zealand is also under the watchful eye of a shadowy, sinister force, the Chinese Communist Party. In 2008, New Zealand signed a free trade agreement with China, and in the years that followed, their trade with China tripled. So has the Communist Party's influence. Chinese dissidents in New Zealand have been harassed. People with questionable ties to the Communist Party have been elected to powerful positions in the New Zealand government. And people who have criticized this have been threatened, like Professor Anne-Marie Brady, who reported that her home was broken into, her car was being tampered with, and she was the recipient of threats through the post and via phone. So it's kind of shocking that New Zealand's trade minister recently went to Beijing for a Belt and Road forum, and came back saying New Zealand wants to join the Belt and Road. I believe we have a clip of that.
Against the power of mortal, there can be no victory.
Oops, wrong clip. What the New Zealand trade minister actually said was, it seems more likely that we can find a win-win situation with China. And if you believe that, I've got a shiny new ring of power to give you. What the trade minister said is in a way even more disturbing, because win-win is exactly the phrase Chinese leader Xi Jinping uses to describe the Belt and Road. And anyone who's been paying attention should know that win-win just means the Chinese regime wins either way. It means the country either pays back their loans with interest, or China takes their strategic assets instead. Of course, a lot of developing countries feel like they have no real choice, that it's either Chinese investment or no investment at all. But is New Zealand really in that same position? Actually, the previous New Zealand government had originally signed a Belt and Road Agreement in 2017, but it never really went anywhere because there were concerns over having too much Chinese influence in the country. So how does the current New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern feel about it? I mean, I know I would be a little concerned if my trade minister went to a country that was actively trying to undermine mine and came back spouting propaganda slogans. Well, after the trade minister's return, Ardern said, the fact that we've taken a little pause as we've worked to really flesh out that arrangement has been no bad thing because Belt and Road has really evolved. Oh yes, it's evolved so much. I mean, it's now green and sustainable. And when has the Chinese Communist Party ever lied? Actually, never mind, we don't have time to go through that list. Incidentally, Prime Minister Ardern's Labour Party has accepted donations that may be linked to the Communist Party. But don't worry, because the opposition National Party has also been accused of hiding political donations that are possibly linked to the Chinese Communist Party. The Communist Party knows how to cover all of its bases. So far, there have not been any concrete investment plans for New Zealand. That's because New Zealand is not like most of the developing countries that have joined the Belt and Road. New Zealand doesn't need massive infrastructure investment. But New Zealand's finance minister feels New Zealand has a lot to offer China, specifically greening the Belt and Road, or helping address some of the issues around transparency, or whether it's using our regulatory systems, which are amongst the best in the world. Yes, China is the perpetual bad boy. The United States, Canada, Australia, they never really understood China, but New Zealand does. New Zealand will be the one to make China change. But there's also the pressure of missing the boat. The idea that if New Zealand doesn't join up now, China will take its big economy to another country, one more willing to put out. Now, New Zealand security agencies have been saying they're concerned about foreign interference from China, particularly in the case of Huawei, a Chinese company that the US has said poses a national security risk. And New Zealand's security agencies were able to block a New Zealand telecom company from using Huawei equipment. But Prime Minister Ardern was quick to say there was no final ban on Huawei. All this has led security experts to question if maybe New Zealand is at risk of turning into a Nazgul. New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, an intelligence network set up in 1955 between the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. But former CIA China expert Peter Mattis has suggested maybe New Zealand shouldn't be in it anymore because of the level of Chinese Communist Party influence. Australia faces the same issues. The difference is, in New Zealand, the former and current prime ministers don't seem to realize there's a problem. And there's a number of well-connected voices of support inside New Zealand that want to join the Belt and Road. Air New Zealand, for example. More than half the company is owned by the New Zealand government. Its chief executive said, "We're a little country. We've got to step into this space." Oh, like a hobbit. The problem is, if you actually put a hobbit in front of a dragon, the dragon will bite his head off. Sorry, Bilbo. Countries and businesses around the world have been making this mistake for years. People see the gold and forget there's a giant dragon. So how has China trade worked out so far for Air New Zealand? Over the 13 years it's been in China, Air New Zealand has lost $100 million. That's because the Chinese government gives preference to Chinese airlines. But surely just because this is the same story that happens again and again doesn't mean tomorrow won't be different. So hand over the ring. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. And remember, this show is brought to you thanks to support from viewers who contribute through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Visit patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber. But you know, there's a common Chinese saying, "La schmaz." What's that, Shelley? Oh, okay. I'm being told no Chinese people ever say that.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views on an episode, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting.
Ride in luxury to your destination in only double the amount of time it would take you to fly there. Dreams come true. And China is the little engine that could.
I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
It's kind of ironic that I'm the minority in a show about China. People in the comments, they'll be like, "You're a traitor." I'm being a patriot. This is my way of showing that I love the country that I came from.
Matt, Shelley, and I went to the Philippines to disputed waters, the Scarborough Shoal.
China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese military is asserting its claims in the South China Sea, so there's a dispute.
We had to take a rickety little Filipino fishing boat surrounded by threatening Chinese Coast Guard vessels.
Chris planted the China Uncensored flag, and then we got away with it. Chris, Shelley, our cameraman, and I went to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, hoping to interview the leader of China, Xi Jinping.
Oh, we are being helped. Going to...
What is it, China Uncensored?
China Uncensored, yeah. I don't suppose there's a chance I could use them.
Down the staircase.
The lead security guard followed us out and said we were banned for life from the Waldorf Astoria.
Chris Chappell here right outside of Mongkok. Our camera guy is in there right now. He's seen people getting beat by police. Police are trying to tear down the tents. Things are wild now.
People would say things to us like, my professor plays China Uncensored for our class. To see people really believe in what we were talking about was life-changing for all of us.
One word you would use to describe Chris Chappell.
Committed.
Hilarious.
Engaging. Intriguing.
Have you heard of China Uncensored? Great comedy show. Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
The way that the US is treating China now, it will start to affect people's lives, and they'll need somewhere to go to learn about that.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国解密.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show available on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.